Story 1. My name is Jacob, and this happened when I was 18. I was working at a fast food place which was beside a remote highway. I was working hard to afford my apartment while taking classes at the local community college. I normally worked the later shifts at the drive-thru window, which is the one spot most employees hated working the most, as you constantly have to deal with extremely impatient, oftentimes very rude people on the phone or have music blaring. And they don't realize that I wasn't the individual who took their order, so it's not my fault if it's wrong. In addition to that, you're constantly on your feet and exposed to the elements no matter how cold, windy, or rainy it is. You have to keep leaning out into it. I worked the late shift with two people. Connie, who was a high school dropout. She was always late to work and never invested in what she was doing. The other was Dave, who was a deadbeat, who often smelled like weed and only kept the job because of his parents. Otherwise, they would throw him out of the house. He was 32 years old. One night after 11 p.m., I was by the drive-thru on an extremely cold January night, flipping through the pages of my class notes and trying to keep myself warm by the frying machine. Connie was mopping while looking at her phone, and Dave was in the back probably getting stoned in the walk-in cooler. Considering how cold it was, we rarely got any customers at this hour, and even if we did, they were almost always college kids or truck drivers passing by who used the drive-thru but never physically walked into the restaurant. I stood up, stretched my legs, and told Connie that I was heading to the bathroom. It was around 11:45 at this point. I came back in less than 5 minutes later with Connie in the same spot she was before. I walked past her and turned the corner to return to the window and froze dead on the tracks as I saw a bald man in a black hoodie standing directly outside the window staring in. His eyes were wide with a blank expression. The figure made direct eye contact with me and smirked and slammed his palm against the window. I had no idea what to do. He didn't look like a customer, and inside my head the words psychopath, danger, trouble, and death all exploded like fireworks. The window was already shut and locked to protect me from the cold, but the doors were all unlocked, and this person could easily walk right and grab any one of us if he wanted to. Soon he spoke in a low voice which was inaudible. I could read his dried lips as he said, "Open the window," and fogged up the glass with his breath. Even if it was a regular customer, I was under no obligation to open the window. It's unlawful to serve walk-ups at the drive-thru window, certainly for their safety, but also for ours. I shook my head to deny his request and backed away. I called Connie over my shoulders to lock the doors, and this whole time, he didn't break eye contact with me, and to the best of my memory, I don't even remember it blinking. His blank expression changed into a sinister smile, and I kid you not. His gums were black. I could see them clearly. They were as black as licorice. He hissed again, open louder this time, and slammed his other hand against the window and licked the window glass with his tongue. That's when a third hand slammed itself against the window, a left hand, and it was just as pale and skeletal as the other two. I lost my mind and a shiver ran down my spine. "Call the cops!" I screamed and ran back to the office, which was the only room with locking doors and no windows. I heard Connie scream. She dropped the mop and ran to the back with me. All the yelling attracted Dave. He came to see what was all the fuss about, and I shouted for him to come inside. We looked at the security camera, and that man was still standing outside the window and started banging his head against the window in an attempt to break it. We locked the office door and called the cops, explaining to the operator that there were at least 2 prowlers outside, acting in a threatening manner towards us. I kind of expected it to be over after I called the cops. If it was a prank, they would run once they realized they scared me enough to call 911. But it didn't end there. We watched as he left the drive-thru window, circled the building, and made for the front door. I was still on the call with the operator. Connie was freaking out as much as I was, and Dave was muttering something about not getting the police involved, likely because he was carrying weed. Minutes later, the power went out and everything, cameras, lights, the whole building went down. And barely 10 seconds later, after we all had quieted down after shouting at each other in the dark, we heard footsteps in the dining room area. I whispered to Connie, asking if she had locked the doors. She didn't reply, and we heard footsteps going past the office. My heart was pounding like crazy, and after another few minutes we heard the wail of police sirens outside. We were expecting for the police to shout at someone to get on the ground, but we never did. We waited until the police identified themselves and got out. Since the power was down, we couldn't show the cops the security footage, so we just told them what we saw. They searched the whole building but didn't find any trace of those men. The owner of the restaurant showed up about an hour later after Dave and Connie had left. The next day, my manager called me and asked me to work the night shift. I asked him if the creep from last night had been caught, and he said there was no creep. I told him I quit and hung up the phone. I had no idea what caused the power outage, which apparently erased all of the security footage from the day, and without proof on video. My manager and the cops concluded that was an elaborate prank. But it still bothers me to this day, as I know what I saw was not some childish prank. Story 2. Live in the southern province of the Netherlands. I'm 20 years old, and all my life I've wanted to work as a caretaker for people with a disability. Just a few months ago, my dream came true, and now I work as a full-time caretaker at a living facility in Limburg. The story takes place at this facility when I was just 17 years old and worked there as an intern for my education. The living facility is situated right outside the city, away from all the hustle and bustle, and is surrounded by woods to provide a peaceful environment for our patients. The facility consists of 3 houses that are internally connected. Each one can house 8 people, which makes a total of 24 patients that live in the facility. Each patient has his or her own room, ranging from small to large, to a separate bathroom and kitchen and a shared bathroom in the hallway. One day, one of the patients who had lived there for 3 years moved out to live at another facility. His family claimed that the patient did not feel safe in his room because he would hear knocking coming from his closet. We made our apologies for the inconvenience but didn't think much of it. A month later, when the room was cleaned and disinfected, a new patient came to live in the empty room. It was an elderly man named Rick. Rick was a warm and kind-hearted man who loved talking about horses that he had as a child, as well as his great love for Russian opera. We would often hear him sing opera, and I must admit he had quite a powerful and wonderful voice. At first, he would bid us good night before he went to bed. But as time went by, Rick seemed more and more distressed. He didn't eat and drink as much as he used to, and he lost a significant amount of weight at a troubling rate. He would sit quietly on the couch, staring blankly at nothing. When I asked what was wrong, he would say that he had a terrible nightmare about some kind of creature lurking in his closet. My colleague and I debated whether or not he could be getting Alzheimer's and would need testing for it. He had been tested, but nothing came out of those tests. Every night, Rick would scream us awake, and when we came into the room, he'd be sitting on his bed, trembling and pointing at the closet. He said that something crawled out of the closet and came up to his bed. He described this creature as being skinny, more likely bony, with rotting meat hanging from its bones. The creature had green eyes similar to his deceased mother and huge fingers that looked like claws. Its face was that of a human skull and a mouth filled with sharp teeth like a crocodile. The creature would wrap its claws around his body. Rick described so vividly how he could smell the horrible scent of decay as the creature opened its mouth to whisper in his ear to get out. Rick covered his ears as he said that and soiled himself. My colleague checked the closet, but there was nothing inside besides his clothes, and the only thing we could say to him was that everything was going to be fine. A month later, Rick would wake up with markings all over his body. Everyone was horrified to see deep scratches that appeared to be claw marks. There were even bite marks that were deeper and more animalistic than any human bite. Rick would not want to go to his room anymore, and he would take his dinner and place it at the door of his closet. When my colleague tried to take the food away, he said in a trembling voice that it would make the creature angry, and if it became angry, it would punish him. I felt so sorry for him, especially seeing the fear in his eyes as we took away the plate. For 2 weeks, the same thing kept happening with Rick. One night, me and one of my colleagues were working the night shift. We were making our usual rounds, checking if everyone was sleeping and all the machinery was still up and running. That was when we heard a horrible, bone-chilling scream echo through the building. It came from Rick's room. We stormed in, slamming the door open, revealing a horrible sight. Rick was lying on his back on his bed while he was gasping for air. He was clawing at his neck and chest, ripping flesh off and making bloody gashes all over his upper body. His bed and himself were covered in blood, and there was a trace of blood leading to his closet, which was slightly opened. My colleague called the emergency line while I desperately tried to stop Rick from clawing, but the only thing Rick did was scream as if possessed and started at the ceiling. While handling Rick, my eyes went towards the closet, and that's when I saw a pair of green glowing eyes peeping through the slightly opened closet door. I froze as it looked at me, and my heart began to race. I closed my eyes tightly for a split second, and when I opened them, it was gone. I regained my consciousness and tried to calm Rick down while still thinking about what I saw. After what felt like hours, the ambulance arrived and took Rick away. Sadly, after a week, we received the news that Rick had passed away. The room once again was left empty. The blood was cleaned up by a cleaning company and the room was disinfected. The room would be occupied soon enough, but even before the room was occupied, I found another patient, an old lady standing inside the room in front of that closet. I asked what she was doing in here. She muttered, "This room should never be occupied again, it is angering him." And then I remembered what I saw. Hearing this from her gave me goosebumps. I asked her, "Who is him?" She replied, "You know who I mean." After saying that, she walked out of the room and left me breathless. I stormed out of the room, locking it behind me. I never told anyone what I saw that day, and it still bothers me, so I don't go in that room after that incident. A week later, that same old lady shifted into that room. I don't know why, and I never tried to find out. Story 3. This happened when I was about 20 years old. I was working at a sawmill, which was located in North Carolina. The mill was located beside a river covered with thick forest, and since the mill was located in such an isolated place, it took an hour to get back into civilization and almost an hour and a half to reach my apartment. Working in a sawmill was pretty boring, but I got used to it as I forced myself to work there. I got to be friends with a colleague there whose name was Martin. He was in his late 20s with a shaggy beard and always smelled like alcohol. He had horror books with him and enjoyed grotesque jokes. He lived in an old wooden house that was not very far from the sawmill. One day when we were chatting, he said that he had come up with an amazing idea. Then he showed me his notebook, in which a dozen of people's names were written. Among them were the names of the manager and some of our other colleagues. "I will kill them all within the next years," he said with a sinister smile on his face. I was taken aback by this comment, but also wasn't that concerned since he used to joke around like that quite often. But I still confronted him. I asked if he was having a hard time and told him to take it easy, to which he denied and said that it was a perfect plan. I had enough of him, so I told him to get a vacation and take some rest and went back to work, but he was looking at his notebook incessantly. A few days later, he looked much more joyful than usual. I asked him if there was any good news, and he invited me to his house, saying he had something to show me. I had never been to his house before and thought it would be a good idea to get to know him more and help him with whatever he was going through. Later that day, I went to his house with him, and when we arrived, a foul smell hit my nose and it was like rotting meat. I asked him if he left some meat and had forgotten about it, but he didn't reply. He directed me to a locked room, and the stench got even harder and unbearable. I wanted to get out from there, but also was curious to what was behind that door. He said that there was something great inside, and then he started to unlock it. For some reason, my heart began pounding. I knew something sinister was waiting for me inside that room. As soon as he opened the door, the foul smell gushed into my nose, and even though I was covering my nose and mouth, I threw up right at the spot. He laughed and switched on the room's lights. What I saw next gives me nightmares to this day. There were clear plastic bags, and I could see clearly what was inside them. They were body parts cut into chunks, and the bags were filled with them. I was so shocked and scared that my legs froze, and meanwhile Martin grabbed what looked like a saw and told me, "Cutting humans is much more fun than cutting trees. Do you want to be chopped like them?" he asked. Not a word came out of my mouth. He then proceeded to say, "Tell me how you feel when I cut your limbs. I'm really curious." I asked everyone, but they didn't say anything. He then grabbed me and tried to bring the saw closer to my shoulder, but I kicked him in his stomach and he growled in pain. He fell to the floor and I took the chance to kick the saw far away from him. He got up and tried strangling me. I pushed him and tackled him to the ground. We traded punch for punch. The scariest part was that he was just laughing. I had adrenaline rushing through my body and I kept punching him in the face until he passed out. I called the cops and somehow got out of the house. The cops showed up, and when they went inside, the room was filled with blood splattered everywhere. They arrested him and took him to the hospital. The maniac had several injuries: 3 broken ribs, a broken jaw, a broken nose, and a concussion. I was also rushed to the hospital with a few missing teeth and a broken jaw. The police investigated and found 5 bags, and they concluded that he had already killed 3 people. They also found his notebook in which he was writing a horror novel. It included the process of how he lured people and dismembered their body parts were written in detail. The following content of the novel was about killing me and cutting my limbs into small pieces. I still don't understand why he did those things. The police asked me if I had an argument with him recently, but there was no such thing. I changed jobs after that incident and never went to any stranger's house again. Story 4. I am a father and I was tragically put in a position to give away my daughter for adoption since my wife passed away in childbirth. The family that adopted her keeps me in a loop by sending her pictures and videos. The incident took place 4 years after when I was a forest ranger in West Alabama, about 50 miles from Georgia border. It was October time, and we got information that deer were going missing from a certain part of the forest. Me and 2 of the other members were tasked to find out what was causing the disappearance. We prepared to leave for the forest and packed our supplies. We left at about 12 p.m. and reached our destination at 4 p.m. We set up a tree blind and set up our sleeping area and gathered dry wood for our rocket stove. We decided to relax for a bit before searching the area. Around 9 p.m., my colleagues had already gone to sleep, and before sleeping I sat around the fire watching videos of my daughter playing and talking until I got tired and went into the blind, which was about 12 feet in the air. I was going to get some shut-eye, and I ended up falling asleep rather quickly to the sound of the forest. I woke up in the middle of the night to dead silence and one of my colleagues snoring. Besides the snoring, the entire forest was deathly quiet. The night air cooled my face as I sat up. While I sat there waiting for any noise to come through, it was as if the night had died. After a few minutes, I decided to ignore it and tried to get some more sleep for the investigation tomorrow. It took about 30 minutes before I started to doze off again when I heard something that shook me to my core. I heard my daughter's voice. At first I thought I was hallucinating, but about 30 seconds later, I heard it again, only this time it was louder and clearer. I startled and woke one of my colleagues. He was half asleep and couldn't understand what I was trying to say. He just said it must be my imagination and then went back to sleep again. The voice said, "Daddy, help me." It was unmistakably my daughter's voice, only it sounded like a recording. I checked my phone, but it was turned off to conserve battery. It was a rather bright night, so I decided to peer out of the blind to see if I could see anything. In my head, I wanted to see what was using my daughter's voice. She was 600 miles away from there. There was no way she was out here with me. I wanted to investigate, so I climbed down the tree blind and took my rifle with me. I searched the area from where I heard the voice. I was too scared, but I kept going. After walking for like 10 minutes, I stumbled upon deer corpses. They looked like they had been attacked by an animal, but the bite marks were too big, unlike the wild animals living in the forest. That's when I heard the voice again. I saw a tall creature about 8 feet tall. My breathing froze and my eyes widened. It was sniffing the air. It had no hair. Its ribcage was clearly visible and had long, lanky arms. As it sniffed the surroundings, and I knew if I made a noise and tried to run, it would chase after me and I wouldn't make it back on time. So I stood still and watched in horror as it let out the voice of my daughter again. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Sweat started dripping through my fingers as it roamed the area for about 5 minutes. I refused to look away from that creature until I watched it leave the area. After about 10 minutes, the sound of the forest was lively again, but my legs were frozen in that place. As soon as I saw the coast was clear, I sprinted back to the blind and woke up my colleagues. I told them nervously what I had seen, and they just laughed and said that I must have had a bad dream. After that, they went back to sleep, but I for sure wasn't able to sleep the rest of the night. The next day I had a high fever, so I rested while the other 2 went out to investigate. I told them about the dead deers I had seen last night. They went in that direction, but found nothing, since I was sick, and there was no lead to the disappearances we left. I was in the hospital for 2 days. I never returned to that area. I told one of my native friends about this incident, and he said that what I saw that day was probably a Wendigo. I moved cities, but still work as a forest ranger, thankfully. I never encountered that creature again. The end. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also, hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.